Hi friends. Please subscribe and help me get my first 1,000 subscribers. It's one click for you, but for me it's a huge encouragement and motivation. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's go. In Alex and Lisa's house there was the harmony that many couples dream of. Mornings began with warm kisses and short, almost ritualistic conversations over a cup of coffee. Lisa, with her soft smile and easy gaze, always seemed a little mysterious, as if she held a little secret inside, which gave her even more charm. Alex, tall and confident, adored her for it. They had been together for over a decade, but the spark between them had never faded. The house, a cozy two-story cottage in the suburbs, was always full of life. The children, Maggie and Jake, filled the morning air with laughter and boisterous arguments. Alex loved to listen to them argue over who would be the first to choose a cartoon before breakfast. Lisa was nimble in the kitchen, simultaneously frying eggs, putting bread in the toaster, and wiping chocolate residue from Jake's cheek. "Alex, you left your keys in the bedroom again," Lisa said softly, giving him a look of kindly mockery. "You couldn't have survived without me." "No one can," Alex winked, picking up his coffee cup. "You're our engine." She laughed, but there was something in her smile that tugged at his soul every time. It wasn't just happiness, it was the certainty of their world, of their family, of the two of them. Each morning was similar to the previous ones, but this was their rhythm, their cozy ordinariness. Alex would take his briefcase, kissing Lisa goodbye, and go to work, where a pile of cases and calls awaited him. Lisa, staying at home, continued to manage the children, preparing them for school. Everything went like clockwork. One of the evenings was especially memorable for Alex. It was just before the events that turned his life upside down. He and Lisa were sitting on the veranda, watching the sun slowly disappear over the horizon. Alex had a glass of wine in his hands and Lisa, covered with a light plaid, was telling a story from her childhood. Alex loved those evenings when everything was so simple and perfect. When the children were already asleep and their house was filled with silence. Those were their moments when they could forget about the world around them. But in recent weeks something had changed. Alex couldn't say exactly what it was, but he began to notice that Lisa had become a little different. She spent more time with her phone, sometimes getting distracted when he asked her a question. One day he noticed that her calls were getting shorter, and some of them she ended quickly as soon as he entered the room. "Is everything okay?" he asked one evening as she sat at her laptop. "Sure," she answered quickly, not even looking away from the screen. "I'm just checking something for Maggie's school." Although there was nothing suspicious in her words, the intonation of her voice was different. "You know," Alex said, sitting down next to her, "you can tell me if something's bothering you." Lisa looked at him, hesitating for a second, but then her face broke into a familiar smile. "You're making it up. I'm just a little tired." "It's okay." Alex nodded, but the feeling of unease remained. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a faint breeze before a storm. He convinced himself that it was just his imagination, that their life was still perfect. The next morning everything looked as normal. Lisa had made breakfast, the kids were getting ready for school, and Alex was hurrying to work. They exchanged a brief kiss at the door and he left, promising to come back early for a small family dinner. Little did he know that this regular morning ritual would be the last moment of peace in his life. Alex loved the evening drives home. Those half an hour of silence after endless meetings and calls at the office were something of a ritual for him. The streets were almost empty. The radio played softly, the song smoothly replaced by a news item, but he didn't even listen to the words. On the deserted street in front of his car, red and blue lights suddenly flashed. A police siren snapped him out of his musings. Alex automatically checked the speedometer. He was driving within the authorized speed limit. "What the hell?" he muttered, pulling over to the curb. His heart beat a little faster, but he reminded himself that it was just a random check. The policeman got out of his car, but he wasn't heading toward him at all. Alex froze, watching as the man in uniform bypassed his car and approached another, a silver Camry that was parked in the shade of the trees. The car seemed familiar to him, but the thought immediately slipped away. His heart beat faster when he noticed that the windows of that car were slightly fogged up and he could see some movement inside. It didn't look like anything ordinary. A policeman tapped on the window of the Camry car. Alex watched the scene through the windshield, suddenly seized by a strange uneasiness. Something inside moved. A moment later, the glass was ajar and the woman behind the wheel turned her head. Alex froze. It was Lisa. What the hell? He exhaled, feeling the blood rush to his head. Inside the car, he noticed another person, a man who was hurriedly moving away from Lisa, as if he were trying to hide. The policeman was clearly saying something, but no words reached Alex. His feet moved on their own as he got out of the car and headed for the one at the curb. "Mister, stay where you are," the policeman said loudly, turning toward him. But Alex was already beside him. Lisa looked like she had been caught in the act. Her face was flushed and her eyes flickered, trying to find an excuse. The man in the salon looked even worse. He was trying to avoid Alex's gaze, moving toward the door as if he hoped to disappear into thin air. "Alex, it's not what you think," Lisa began, her voice shaking. "Is it? Then tell me, what is it?" His voice was louder than he expected. He pointed at the man beside her, feeling the tension in his chest turn to anger. The man opened his mouth to say something, but the policeman intervened, raising his hand. "Gentlemen, calm down. Let's settle this calmly." His voice sounded firm, like a man used to resolving conflicts. Alex turned to Lisa. "What are you doing here? Who is this? And why are you sitting in a car with fogged windows like in a cheap scene from a movie?" His words were like lashes. Lisa looked like she was about to cry, but instead she turned to the policeman. "We were just talking," she tried to explain, but her voice sounded strained. The policeman raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting from her to the man. "If it's just a conversation, why did I see your car wobbling?" His voice was stern but calm. "And why couldn't you have found a more appropriate place to talk?" The man finally decided to speak. "Look, this was a mistake. He stammered, unable to find the words. Alex stepped closer to the car, his hands clenched into fists. A policeman stood between him and the car, blocking the way. "Mister, I understand your condition, but you need to calm down." His tone did not allow any objections. "If you want, we can settle this later, but right now it's best to step back. I want to know who it is and what's going on here." Alex's voice was shaking, but not from fear. His gaze was piercing Lisa. "Lisa, are you going to explain this to me, or am I going to get the truth myself?" Lisa remained silent, her hands nervously gripping the steering wheel. The man opened his mouth again, but never dared to say anything. Alex felt something inside him finally collapsing. "We need to talk at home," Lisa finally said, her voice weak but determined. "Not here." The policeman shifted his gaze to Alex. "I'll let you all go if you're ready to disperse peacefully. But if you continue to fight here, it will become official business." His tone was unambiguous. Alex looked at Lisa, then at the man who was still sitting in the car, clearly wanting to disappear. He gritted his teeth, feeling the growing anger turn into sharp pain. "Okay," he said through gritted teeth. "We'll go home and figure it out." He turned around, heading for his car, but as he got behind the wheel, he realized that this was only the beginning. Everything he thought was stable and secure was as shaky as sand. Lisa and her companion left a little later. Alex drove behind, watching their car as if they were enemies that were slipping out of sight. It seemed to him that the road became endless. But what was waiting for him at home, he didn't even want to imagine. Alex slammed the door of his car with such force that it echoed in the deserted street. The engine of Lisa's Camry was already rumbling, she was slowly pulling away from the curb. Her companion sat in the front seat, obviously tense, as if he was expecting an explosion every moment. Alex turned onto the road, following them. His eyes were fixed on the red brake lights ahead, and his head was filled with rage mixed with disbelief. Something cold and unpleasant was twisting him from the inside. He wanted to scream, to stop their car, to pull that man outside, but the voice of the policeman warning them to be quiet still echoed in his head. They were driving through a sleeping suburb. Houses with extinguished windows stretched along the road, streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalks as if the streets themselves were watching his humiliation. Lisa turned down a familiar street, heading toward the house. Alex followed her, and his thoughts were racing. His world was crumbling. His wife, the woman he had spent 10 years with whom he had shared every joy and sorrow, was now sitting in the same car with another man. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. When both cars parked in their driveway, Alex jumped out of his car, his heart pounding so loudly that it seemed even the neighbors could hear him. "Are you going to get out of the car, or do I have to get you out myself?" Alex's voice sounded cold and sharp, like a knife blade. Lisa opened the door of her car, raising her hands as if trying to calm him down. "Alex, please, not here, not like this." Her voice shook, but she tried to speak calmly. "We'll talk inside. It's not what you think it is. Is it?" Alex stepped closer, venom in his voice. "Then explain why you were sitting in a car with him, on a deserted street with fogged windows." The man behind the wheel opened the door, and Alex turned sharply to him. "You better stay there," he warned, his voice so low and threatening that even the stranger seemed to freeze. "Or, I swear to God, I'll explain everything to you plainly." Lisa rushed between them, putting her hands on Alex's chest, trying to stop him. Stop it, Alex. Just go inside. I'll explain everything. Not now, not on the street. Alex took a deep breath, feeling the rage boiling up inside him. He knew that if he started now, he wouldn't be able to stop. He turned around abruptly and headed for the house. Lisa lingered in the driveway, looking back at the man in the car. Her face was a strange mixture of guilt and fear. You're staying here, she briefly tossed to the man. I'll handle this. She quickly followed Alex, trying to catch up with him. Entering the house, Alex didn't wait for her explanation. He went to the living room, where the light scent of the candle, which Lisa had lit in the morning, was still in the air. That scent, which had always reminded him of home and warmth, now seemed stifling. Begin, he said, turning to her. His eyes were cold, his voice steady, but there was a storm in that calm tone. Tell me who he is, and what you were doing on that street. Lisa closed the door behind her, slowly took off her coat and laid it on the back of a chair. She tried to calm her breathing, but her hands were shaking slightly. It was a mistake, she began, her voice quiet, almost pleading. He's a coworker of mine, we're working on a project. We were just late for work and talking in the car. I didn't want you to think anything wrong. Alex laughed a laugh that made Lisa flinch. Talked? You sat in the car with him with the windows fogged up. Did you talk? He stepped toward her, his gaze piercing her like a blade. Do you have any idea what that looks like? Lisa lowered her gaze, her hands nervously rubbing the edge of her sweater. It's not what you think it is, she repeated, her voice growing quieter. Then what is it? Alex didn't back down. Do you think I'm a fool? Do you expect me to believe that this is just a conversation? She raised her head sharply, her eyes glistening with tears. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. Go where? Alex felt something inside him snap. He waited for an explanation, but every phrase she said only increased his suspicions. Lisa took a step back as if her words could cause an explosion. She knew he was waiting for the answer she was afraid to give. Her voice was almost inaudible when she spoke again. Alex, I can't explain it right now. I just can't. Damn it, Lisa. He clenched his fists, trying to hold himself together. You've already said everything with your silence. Lisa turned away, covering her face with her hands. Alex stood in the center of the room, his heart was like a piece of ice. He felt like he didn't recognize her. The woman he loved, the one he shared every part of his life with. You and I are done. I've said everything I wanted to say, he finally said, turning toward the door. But instead of leaving, he stopped. It was the moment when he realized that the truth, as horrible as it was, had already penetrated their house. Alex stood in the living room, looking at Lisa, who was still hiding her face in her palms. Her silence was unbearable for him. Everything was boiling inside him. Words stuck in his throat, and he realized that he couldn't hold back any longer. He turned abruptly and walked toward the front door. Alex, no. Lisa shouted, rushing after him, but he was already outside. The cold air hit him in the face, intensifying his rage. The silver Camry was still parked in the driveway, the engine turned off, but the headlights were still on. Through the windshield, Alex saw the man who had been sitting in the passenger seat. He was staring tensely at his phone, as if he hoped that if he ignored reality, everything would somehow work itself out. You think you can just sit here? Alex said loudly, heading for the car. His voice cut through the silence like a thunderclap. The man raised his head sharply, his face turning white. Alex yanked the car door open with force. It opened, and he grabbed the man by the collar of his shirt, literally pulling him out. Alex, stop. Lisa shouted, running out of the house, but her words couldn't hold him back. The man tried to break free, raising his arms to protect himself. Hey, take it easy. He shouted, his voice high, panicked. This is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Alex growled, pushing him against the hood of the car. You're sitting with my wife in a car on an empty street, and this is a misunderstanding? The man tried to pull back, but Alex held him tight. He was taller and stronger, and that was playing into his hands right now. We were just talking, shouted the man, struggling to catch his breath. Nothing happened, I swear. Nothing? Alex shoved him even harder so that he could barely stay on his feet. Then why is your ass still here? Why didn't you leave when you realized? Did you expect me to believe you were just friends? Lisa ran up, grabbing Alex's arm. Stop, Alex. You're gonna kill him. It might be easier that way, he snarled, not letting go of his victim. The man coughed, desperately trying to explain himself. Look, it's not what you think. We work together, okay? She wanted to talk about work and I About work? Alex let go of him with such force that he almost fell over. Are you serious? On an empty street at night with fogged windows? That's your version? The man lowered his gaze, rubbing the collar of his shirt. His silence spoke louder than words. Alex moved even closer, his face only a few inches from the man's. Tell me the truth, he hissed. Or I swear I'll get it out of you. Lisa stepped in again, trying to get between them. Alex, stop it, she shouted. This isn't what you imagined. We're just what? He turned to her. Are you trying to make excuses for him? Or do you expect me to believe that nothing happened? Look me in the eye and tell me it's not what I think it is. Her face turned red and she looked away. It was a second that changed everything. Alex realized she couldn't lie to his eyes. The man, getting bolder, stepped back, trying to seize the moment. Look, I don't want any trouble, he muttered. I'll leave and you'll never see me again. You're right. You won't see me or my wife again, Alex answered sharply, grabbing the man's shoulder and turning him around. But first tell me what you were doing in that car. The man hesitated, his lips pressed into a thin line. Alex saw fear and anxiety flickering in his eyes. He was about to speak, but Lisa shouted loudly. Alex, that's enough. Stop torturing him. It's my fault. Those words struck Alex like a bolt of lightning. He froze, letting go of the man and turning toward her. Lisa stood there, her shoulders slumped, her eyes glistening with tears. Was it your fault? His voice was low, full of pain. What do you mean by that? Lisa took a step forward but said nothing more. The man took advantage of this moment and quickly slid to his car, jumped behind the wheel and started the engine. Hey, stop! Alex shouted, but it was too late. The wheels of the Camry spun off, and the car sped away, leaving the two of them alone in the deserted driveway. Alex turned to Lisa. She stood with her head down, her tears dripping to the ground. Everything was boiling inside him: rage, pain, bewilderment. But the only thing he could do was wait for her explanation. Speak, Lisa, he said quietly, almost a whisper, but with such force that her shoulders shook. There was no point in keeping silent now. The night froze around them like a frozen frame in an old movie. Alex stood in the driveway, breathing heavily, looking at Lisa, who could barely keep from bursting into tears. There was silence all around, broken only by the sound of his breathing and the distant rustle of the wind in the tree crowns. He felt like he was in the center of some surreal nightmare. I'm waiting, Lisa, Alex said, his voice flat but even more threatening. You said it was your fault. Now explain. Lisa wiped her tears with the back of her hand and looked at him, her lips twitching as if every word she was about to say was scorched by fire. Let's go inside, she whispered. Please. No. Here. No. No more games, Lisa. He stepped closer, looking her straight in the eye. Tell me everything. She licked her lips, and for a second he saw something akin to despair flicker in her gaze. She knew there was no way out. It happened months ago, she finally began, her voice quiet but each word sounding like a slap. It wasn't planned. It was just, we started talking more at work. He was attentive, he listened. Alex felt something inside him burst like a taut string. He clenched his fists but didn't move. He realized that if he started screaming now, he wouldn't be able to hear the rest. Were you listening? He repeated, his voice colder. Is this what you've been missing? You didn't even tell me about it. I tried, she exclaimed, her voice suddenly louder. She wiped the tears away again, but they came back immediately. I tried to tell you, but you were always busy. Work, kids, anything but me. His eyes narrowed. Everything was boiling inside him, but he knew that outburst wasn't the answer. He wanted the truth. And what? Alex stepped closer again. You went to him for attention? What did he give you that I couldn't? Lisa trembled. Her breathing quickened and she took a step back as if his words were hitting her physically. It's not like that, she whispered. I never meant for it to go this far. We just started talking, then coffee, then lunch. I thought it didn't mean anything. But it did. Alex took a step forward, piercing her with his gaze. You were in the car with him, Lisa. Did you see what it looked like? How was I supposed to realize that? Her shoulders slumped like she was carrying the weight of the world on them. Yes, it went too far, she admitted, her voice full of pain. We met a few times outside of work. But I swore to myself that it would end. I couldn't. I didn't want to destroy our family. It was as if those words diffused the air. Alex stood still, listening to her confessions, but his face remained stony. The storm was still raging inside him, but he knew that now was not the time for anger. He needed the full picture. And what do you mean, several times? He asked slowly, almost in a whisper. She averted her gaze, her hands rubbing the hem of her sweater as if that could save her from his accusations. 3. We've met 3 times, she said. But I swear, Alex, it didn't mean anything. It didn't mean anything? He repeated, his voice louder again. Do you think saying that makes me feel better? You went behind my back, Lisa. You lied to me. I didn't want to lie. She shouted back, her voice shaking. I was confused. I felt so alone. Lonely? He grinned, but there wasn't an ounce of amusement in his grin. You were lonely while I was plowing so we could have this house? While I took care of the kids, of you. She covered her face with her hands again, but Alex wasn't about to let her go. Are you still involved with him? He asked sharply. Answer honestly. Lisa froze, her breathing becoming ragged. She shook her head slowly. No. I stopped it. I swore to myself that I wouldn't see him again. She looked at him again, her eyes full of tears. I met with him tonight to tell him it was over. And you had to sit in a car with him on an empty street to do that? His voice was icy. I didn't want you to find out. I was afraid. Her voice trailed off, and she took another step back as if trying to hide from his gaze. Alex wanted to keep asking, to pursue every answer, to get the whole truth out of her, but suddenly he felt his strength leaving him. He looked at the woman he loved more than anything else in the world and realized that their world would never be the same again. I can't be here, he finally said, his voice barely audible. I have to leave. He turned and headed for his car, leaving her standing in the driveway alone. She called out to him, but he could no longer hear her words. The night covered him, but there was an emptiness inside him that he'd never felt before. Alex sat in the car parked on the side of the dark road. The engine was off, but his hands still gripped the steering wheel tightly. Lisa's words, her trembling voice, the confession that had torn him from the inside, were in front of his eyes. The night was eerily quiet, as if the world had decided to hold its breath with him. He wanted to drive away. Just hit the gas, rush away from it all, but where to? Scraps of thoughts swarmed in his head, endless unanswered questions. Lisa had betrayed him, their family, everything they'd built. But worst of all, he didn't know how to live with that. The phone vibrated on the passenger seat. Alex looked at the screen. It was Lisa. Her name popped up in large print like a taunt. He didn't answer it. She'd already left 3 voicemails and sent dozens of texts, but he hadn't opened any of them. Alex wanted silence. He needed silence. But instead of silence came a thought. A burning, distinct one. What if she's still lying? What if this attempt to end things was just an act? He pulled out his phone and opened the browser. Scrolling through the search, he came across one of the places she'd mentioned in her stories. A small cafe downtown where she and her coworkers supposedly frequented. Alex remembered how she'd stayed there once, saying she'd stop by after dinner to close a couple of work issues. He felt uneasy. Maybe he was crazy, but he had to know the truth before the end. Alex put the car in gear and headed that way. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel as he drove. Houses flashed around, then city lights, but it all seemed blurry, fake. When he stopped in front of the cafe, the place looked quiet, almost empty. There were only a few cars in the parking lot. Alex didn't expect to see anything unusual, but he still looked around the area carefully. The lights inside the cafe were dimmed, there were couples sitting at the tables, but no one familiar. Alex turned off the engine and sat in the car, watching. A minute passed, then 5. His heart was beginning to calm down. Maybe it was just his paranoia. Maybe Lisa really was telling the truth. But then the cafe door opened. Alex tensed. A man appeared on the threshold. It was him. The one from the car. The one Lisa called colleague. The man looked around as if checking to see if anyone familiar was nearby. Alex slumped lower in his seat, but his eyes followed the man's every move. The man headed toward a car parked a little farther away. Alex felt a shiver run through his body, mixed with a surge of anger. He hadn't planned anything. His legs, as if on their own, carried him out of the car. Barely realizing what he was doing, he followed. The man was getting into his car when Alex stepped closer. Do you think this is the end? He growled, his voice cutting through the silence. The man flinched, turning around. His face paled at the sight of Alex. What are you doing here? His voice shook, but he tried to keep his composure. I'm the one who has to ask you. Alex took another step closer, his hands clenched into fists. We agreed that you would leave her alone. But you're here. So you're still a part of this. The man held up his hands as if in surrender. Look, I didn't mean for it to go down like this. I thought she had it all worked out. I didn't mean to. You didn't? Alex stepped even closer, his fists tightening even more. You ruined my life. And you just stand there and say you didn't mean to? The man stepped back but stumbled back against the car door. Alex was almost there. For a moment, the thought crossed his mind, what if I hit him? What if I take all this pain out here and now? But then he noticed how that pathetic fear on the man's face was replaced by defiance. You know what? The man said, his voice taking on a strange hardness. She didn't come to me because I lured her. She came to me because you ignored her. I didn't ruin your life. You did. Those words hit harder than any fist could. Alex froze, feeling the rage in him being replaced by something else. Bang. Emptiness. You don't know what you're talking about, he squeezed out, stepping back. The man looked at him a moment longer, then got into the car. His engine started, and a second later he drove off, leaving Alex alone in the empty parking lot. Returning to the car, Alex felt as if someone had ripped a part of his soul out of him. He sat behind the wheel, not knowing where to go. Home didn't seem like home to him anymore. The streets were empty and he just drove, unable to make out the road. The phone vibrated again. Lisa. Alex looked at the screen. This time he picked up the phone. Alex, please answer me. Her voice was quiet, almost pleading. Where are you? Can you come back? We need to talk. He fell silent, listening to her words. For the first time this evening, he felt like he didn't have an answer. I don't know, Lisa, he finally answered. I just don't know. He dropped the call, tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and hit the gas again. The night continued to tighten around him like a cold blanket. And somewhere in that darkness, he was searching for answers that probably didn't exist. Alex arrived home after a few hours that seemed like an eternity to him. His car rolled slowly up the driveway, as if he didn't dare to cross that invisible line beyond which everything he knew became a stranger. The lights were on in the windows of the house. Lisa was waiting. He got out of the car, closing the door so quietly that even the night air didn't waver. His heart pounded muffled and uneven, as if warning that every next second could be another blow. When Alex entered the house, Lisa was sitting on the couch in the living room. Her face was tired, her eyes red from crying. She looked at him but said nothing. Only silence hung between them, deep and heavy as stone. I can't take it anymore, Lisa, Alex said, his voice hoarse but firm. He sat down on the chair opposite her, avoiding looking her in the eyes. I can't sort out where it's true and where it's false anymore. I'm tired. Her hands shook as she crossed them in her lap. Alex, I made a mistake, she finally said, her voice low, almost inaudible. I ruined what we had. But I still love you. You should know that. He nodded, but her words felt like they were hitting a wall he'd built up inside himself. Maybe you do love me. Maybe you're just trying to save what's left, he said, looking down at the floor. But I can't be the person trying to glue it all together anymore. It's too hard. You've broken it. Lisa grasped his hand, her eyes filled with despair. Please, Alex. For us, for the kids. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. He stared at her hand on his for a long moment, but he felt nothing. The warmth that had always been between them was gone, leaving behind only coldness. For the sake of the children? He finally asked, his voice harder. The children deserve the truth, Lisa. They deserve to see real love, not the empty shell of what we had. But we can try. She exclaimed, her voice trailing off. Alex, I can prove to you that it was a mistake, that you are more important to me than anything else. He stood up, pulling away from her. You've already proved enough, Lisa. Prove that you're willing to destroy everything to satisfy your desires. I can't live in this house anymore, I can't look at you and see the person I trusted. The next morning Alex packed his things. He took almost nothing, only the necessities. Lisa begged him to stay, but he was adamant. As he said goodbye to the children, his heart was breaking. Maggie hugged him, not knowing what was going on, and Jake quietly asked if he was coming back. Alex lied that everything would be fine. He rented a small apartment nearby to be closer to the kids. With Liza, they arranged a separation. Alex insisted that the children stay in the house and that he visit them as often as possible. Lisa, realizing all was lost, no longer argued. Months passed. Alex's life changed. He started spending more time with the kids, trying to keep their peace at least partially intact. He went back to work, but scraps of conversations from that night still echoed in his head on the spot. Lisa had written to him, tried to rekindle communication, but he'd responded briefly, dryly, only about the kids. Every time he saw her, he felt the same pain he'd felt that night. She looked haggard, like someone who had lost everything, but it didn't mean anything to Alex anymore. A year later, Alex met another woman. Her name was Kate. She didn't try to fill the void left by Lisa, but she brought a calmness to his life that he sorely lacked. She respected his space, listened without asking unnecessary questions. One day, sitting with Kate in a small cafe, Alex caught himself thinking that he could smile again. He thought about the fact that his life had not ended that night, but had just started anew. Now he knew, even from the deepest betrayal one can get out of it, if one believes that something more awaits ahead. And that concludes our story today. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like and leave a comment. Also, we are always happy to discuss any comments you may have. See you in the next video.